Hey everybody, it's Mrs. Shevchuk here, and today we're going to take a look at how to scale the axes on a graph. In other words, we're looking at how do we figure out what number we go up by. Before we go through the formal steps of how to scale axes, I want to see what you already know how to do. So I'd like you to copy down the number line that you see on the screen here, and then pause the video and see if you can figure out the numbers that go in between the 6 and the 18. Or, in other words, figure out how this graph is scaled. So pause the video and try it on your own, and then come back when you've had a chance to work it out on your own. All right, well, let's see how you did here. I'm guessing some people started by using somewhat of a guess and check strategy by saying, well, if we're starting at 6, maybe we're going up by 2. So 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Going up by 2s doesn't work. Well, maybe we can try going up by 3s. 6, 9, 12, 15, 18. Hey, 3s works. So that means the size of my intervals are 3. So then I'm going to go in and label these 9, 12, 15. Don't forget this one over here, which is 3 more than 18, and the one back here, which is 3 less than 6. All right, so if you got this one, great job. You already know a little bit about scaling axes. If you didn't get it, don't worry. I'll show you the steps in just a second so that you can get them in the future. Now, take a look at this one. This one looks a little bit trickier than the last one we saw because the numbers are bigger and the intervals we can tell are going to be going up by more than 3. So you could use a guess and check strategy, but it would take you a long time to get to the right number that would get you from 47 up to 99. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn a strategy for how to scale an axis when it's not one that you can tell easily just by looking. Before we go back and scale that axis, let's copy down or screen capture the directions for how to scale any axis. Make sure you save this in Notability as Scaling Axes, or copy it carefully into your notebook in your notes section, whichever you prefer. Okay, our first step, we need to find the difference between the two numbers that you know, or you're going to be subtracting them. Okay, then you need to count how many intervals or how many spaces are between the two numbers that you know. Keep in mind here, guys, that intervals, I'm going to draw you a picture so you can see here. Intervals are these spaces in between the tick marks, okay? Don't confuse the intervals with what the tick marks are. Sometimes people want to count these. Don't count the tick marks, count the intervals. So on this graph right here, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 intervals, okay? Or 4 spaces in between. And then you're going to divide the difference by the number of intervals to find the size of each of the intervals, and then you go through and label your axis. It'll make a lot more sense as we do the example together. Just make sure you have this in your notes. Now, using these steps will make that second example much easier to solve. If you haven't already copied it down, pause the video and do so. And then I want you to copy down the problem with me as we work through it. Okay, step 1 says, find the difference between the two numbers we know, or subtract the high from the low. So, we know 47 and we know 99. So I'm going to do 99 minus 47 to figure out the difference between those two numbers. And I get 52. That tells me, you guys, that from here to here is 52 units. Okay, only between the two numbers we know. Now, how many equal units is it broken into? Or how many equal intervals? Well, I see 1, 2, 3, 4 equal intervals. So I'm going to take 52 and divide it by 4. That was my third step there. Okay, divide the difference by the number of intervals to find the size of each interval. Well, 52 divided by 4 is 13. So what does that tell me? Well, that's really important information here. That 13 tells me how big each of these intervals are. So this one's 13, this one's 13, this one's 13. Every interval on this graph is 13 units. Now, you don't need to label that on every graph that you do. I just put it there so you can see where all these numbers kind of fit in here. Okay, so if this one right here is 47, then to get my next one, I have to add 13 onto it. 47 plus 13 is 60. 60 plus 13 is 73. 73 plus 13 is 86. 86 plus 13 is 99, which we already have. And then 99 plus 13 is 112. Notice I went all the way to my last tick mark here. Make sure you do the same. And I have to go back and make sure I get this guy over on the left. So I have to do 47 minus 13 to find out my first number was 34. All right, we finished this one. Let's go on and try the next one. All right, our third example, make sure you have it copied down and you can work out the problem with me as we go through it together. All right, first we're finding the difference between these two numbers that we know. 86 minus 16 is 70, so this space is 70. All right, and then how many intervals do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 intervals between the two numbers that we know. So we're going to divide by 5, and 70 divided by 5 is 14. So the size of my intervals on this graph, it goes up by 14. So now I need to take that 14 and add it on to each of the numbers that we know here. So 16 plus 14 is 30, plus 14 is 44, plus 14 is 58, plus 14 is 72. I like to add it on just to make sure it gets me up to 86, and it does. And then don't forget this last guy over here at the beginning, 16 minus 14 is 2. And there, we've scaled that graph, and I can see that it goes up by 14s. Now, sometimes you'll see graphs that have two different axes that need to be scaled. And something that's really important for you to understand is that the x-axis and the y-axis can go up by different intervals, and oftentimes do. In this situation, we want to make sure that our x-axis, which is this horizontal one here, goes up by equal intervals, okay, from 0 up to 300, and that our y-axis also goes up in equal intervals from 0 to 200. However, remember the intervals on the x-axis and the y-axis can be different. So what I always do is just take a look at one axis at a time. All right, so let's look first at our x-axis. Now, some of you are probably looking at this thinking, wait a minute, the first step is to subtract the two numbers we know, and I only see one number on the x-axis. Well, there's something really important here that you need to know. This point that I'm putting in red, that's our origin. That's where the x and the y-axis cross, and that point is always 0, 0. Okay, so the x-coordinate is 0 and the y-coordinate is 0. So now we know that from here to here is 300 minus 0, which is 300. Okay, that's the difference between the two numbers we know, and it's broken into, I'm just going to count here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 equal intervals. So 300 divided by 5, sorry, I'm running out of space here, tells me that each interval is 60 units on my x-axis. Remember, that's just my x-axis. So if my first one is 0, this is 60, that's 120, here's 180, and 240. So we're done with our x-axis. Now let's take a look at our y-axis. Okay, again, we're starting at 0, and we're going all the way up to 200. So 200, let's use a different color here, 200 minus 0 is 0, and it is divided into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 equal intervals as well, and 200 divided by 5 is 40. So the scaling on our y-axis means it goes up by 40s. So I start at 0, then I go 40, 80, 120, 160, and 200. And we scaled a graph that had two different axes. All right, one final thing before you get a chance to practice some more on your own. Some things to remember about scaling graphs. Again, I would screen capture this and add it to your notes on scaling axes. Remember, the intervals must always be equal, so it's going up by the same number every time. Second thing to remember, when scaling a graph with two axes, like an x and a y axis, just do one at a time because they can have different intervals. For the third step to remember, you might have intervals that are fractions or decimals. You'll see those sometimes. That's okay. All right, life's not perfect. Sometimes we have messy numbers. Number 4, if you only see one number on the graph, look for where 0 might be. I bet it's there. Look for where the x and the y axis intersect. Find your 0. And then 5, and most importantly, I think, because I see this all the time, when you're counting intervals, make sure you count the spaces, not the lines in between. Okay, that's a super common error. It'll mess you up. Don't do it. All right, talk with your teacher if you have any more questions, and thanks for watching.